Bonjour à tous, je suis très heureuse et très honorée.
Good evening to everybody. I'm very happy and honored to be your moderator tonight for this event centered on Western Africa. I'm happy that there are many of you in this pavilion. So we're going to try and see how on many different scales the various people and organizations get organized in this area. I'm working for the French Development Agency. We will be centered on Liberia and the Ivory Coast, as well as on ECOWAS. And I understand that Mr. Sid Traoré, the director of agriculture, will be joining us online, and he's going to present various lines. I would like to indicate to the people in the room that there's going to be a question and answer session, and at the end of the session, and so you have to connect to the site which will appear there. We're going to take no question in the room, so you can ask your questions. Professor Wilson Tare, who works for Liberia, is going to be with us, as well as Mr. Frederick Zarka, who is the director of the fight against climate change in the Ministry of the Ivory Coast for Climate and Changes, and Mr. Chenet for the Department of Sustainable Development for Expertise France is also going to share his experience and everything, and also for the Global Alliance Change for Western Africa, funded by the European Union. Thank them all for welcoming us. This side event is going to show the example and the work from the Western African countries showed in their commitments in spite of very difficult conditions on new topics with resources which are sometimes difficult to mobilize. Frederick Zaka, apart from the Ministry of Environment, you also coordinate the implementation of the low carbon strategy for the Ivory Coast. Can you tell us which strategy is and will be implemented by the Environment Ministry to mobilize the stakeholders and territories in the Ivory Coast to succeed in this integration? Which are the tools and coordination tools which are going to be implemented and which are implemented? Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express our gratitude for identifying the Ivory Coast to share its experience about the coordination under the implementation of the Paris Agreement on the climate. We go back to our concern, and we have to note that just like all the countries, most of the countries which are members of the Convention for the Climate Change, and before going to COP21, the Ivory Coast decided to develop its strategy, and it engaged, it vouched to commit to reducing the low carbon and to ensure a good implementation of this document, which is framing the climate action. So we needed that the institutions set up an entity which could coordinate everything. And this is how the fight against the climate change was created in 2016. It is in charge to ensure at the national level the said coordination. But to do this, it has to rely on strategic documents which frame its action. We have many documents at the national level. We have a political document which deals with the various actions planned in our ministry, but also in other ministries. Then, apart from this document, we also have two notification documents. Their main role is to frame and guide the decisions to ensure good coordinations. We're not going to name them all here. We have national documents which are developed and in which coordination systems are set up, and we also have LBT documents and many others. So to ensure a good coordination on this sectorial document, in most sub-regional documents in countries we have key documents, P&D, which is a framework document, which encompassed all the documents, and the Ivory Coast has made sure that since the Paris Agreement, we wanted in the national development document the actions should be mentioned connected to sustainable development. That was done today, and an axis was dedicated to all the aspects related to climate change. So the state has said will to, and there's also a need to have operational tools to guarantee these coordinations. You have the entity, you have the documents, but you also need operational entities. Otherwise, we cannot make sure that we have a good action in the Ivory Coast. Such tools for us have become urgent needs that we have to find to ensure this action. So there's a need to implement a good legal system, because you know that today each ministry wants to have actions related to climate. So if we do not have a legal framework which is relevant to frame all those actions, we're going to have problems. So when I talk about the legal framework, we need application decrees so that we can identify what each ministry and the private sectors, the organizations, and collectivities have to do, and it is in this document that all those actions have to be expressed. So we have all those provisions, but we also need a system to monitor the operations, relying on this legal framework to enable us to ensure a good coordinations with all the national entities. We're talking about the sectorial ministries, but regionally all the collectivities with which we're working, but also the private sector, which is very important in the implementation. This system is important, and as things come at the right time, we are thinking about how to implement certain operational framework with Expertise France, and the action document has been discussed and endorsed by the ministry and the government, and now we just have to know exactly what we're going to do for 5 worlds to reach the second cycle of reviewing, so that we can have that coordination at the national level. But we need a communication plan for to share experience experiences, but also we need to, that's what has been done in the Ivory Coast, which can be an experience. And we have frameworks to actually share those experiences. There are essential times, but there are others. But I just wanted to tell you what we're doing in the Ivory Coast. And this coordination is also connected with other coordinations, with platforms which included sectorial ministries, but also organizations in the private sector and in the collectivities. The Ivory Coast has 9 partners supporting it. I ensure the coordination with my colleagues in the room, and through this platform, we managed to mobilize all the stakeholders. 9 partners is quite considerable. Each partners come with its processes, and we actually relied on this coordination, and the results are available. We've already made them known to the government, but we also need a communication in the cabinet before it is communicated. Those are a few aspects I wanted to mention. Thank you for your question. Thank you beaucoup, Mr. Zapka. We know how difficult it is to ensure coordination with all those parties at the national level, and cohesion of all the decisions taken on public policies and planification, and going up to developing operational tools and the legal framework and all the works on the monitoring and assessing. There may be a question from the room later on.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Professor Wilson Tarpey. So you're
Professor Wilson
Executive
Tarpey.
Director of Environmental Protection Agency of Liberia. We are now going to discuss another key challenge beyond the mainstreaming of the NDCs within sectoral or local national policies that we just discussed, which is how to involve at local level the civil society as a whole to ensure an effective NDC implementation. So we are now going to move to the experience of Liberia. Could you explain to us what leverage your agency is using in Liberia to involve the whole Liberian society along other partners in reaching the national commitments to the Paris Agreement? Could you give us especially local examples as concrete as possible of why this appropriation is key for reaching your commitment, and share with you your experiences, challenges, and lessons learned?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me thank you on behalf of Liberia, the President and the people of Liberia, for this invitation to share our experience. And I would like to recognize the presence of three of my critical scientists, as Mr. Wapo is there, and I have my UNFCCC head and the director of the MEA, which is the Multilateral Environmental Agreements, Mr. Nyanabo, and my chief technical advisor, Mr. Kamo. So I want to tell you, thank you very much. Well, what we do in the case of Liberia is the issue of the environment and climate change is something that first we must be able to put in a segment that people will understand. When you talk about the environment, how does the common person on the street understands that? Because that individual has an impact on the environment. How does he understand that? We live in a country where at least 60% of the population is below the age of 35. At least 60%. So that means the fight that you have with the environment, climate change, must involve those people. In order for you to do that, when you do that segmentation beyond those people, then the next level is the government. How do you get the government involved? Because there are certain aspects of the fight that government will have to endorse. You have to get government. So we start in the EPA. What we do is a department called intersectorial. And that intersectorial is where significant resources are invested to go in the communities and inform them what environment is, What happens when you go near the wetland and you construct? What happens to you? What happens if you decide to go in the waterway and build a structure? What happens? What happens if you live near a forest or a protected area and you begin to go into the forest? What happens to you? Once we understand that, then the next thing is to work with them in developing what we call our NDC, which is across the spectrum. We got about 11, 12 sectors that are in there, mainly agriculture, energy, and what have you. That's what we have. So once we understand that, and the people, we do a lot of work with the awareness, which is critical. Unfortunately, the level of resources that go into awareness relative to other funds is negligible, which is sad, because you take a $20 million project to go into to the environment, to the community, to do projects, and the community does not understand what is it that you are trying to do. So we need to put some money. So that's where we go with respect to with the one. Then the NDC itself, the construction of the NDC started from the bottom, from the community. We have CBOs, CBEs, we have the civil society on the next level, all sectors, student groups, religious groups, they started the working of the NDC. Then we brought it up to the policy people. And the issue of the environment, I don't know about my colleagues around here, but in the case of Liberia, the people in the community understand it more than the policymakers. Then the policymakers, if they understand it, you need their buy-in. But the way we've been able to do it, fortunately, we have a president who is a former ghetto dweller. I mean, there's no shame about it. We all grew up in the ghetto, so we understand when somebody says you cannot construct this septic tank in this place without contacting EPA. So once we got into the drafting of the NDC, we moved strictly to the organization of a national conference. And the president got the cabinet to subscribe to that. And thanks to my people, my staff here, we put together the national conference. Again, our partners swiftly came. EU want to say thank you for the support. CI, Flora and Fauna, UNDP, all of our colleagues came, and then we got the political buy-in. And this is where we are. The president just left from here. Difficult schedule, but he came because the issue of climate change is significant. It's very, very significant. Now, what do we do now? The next step in order for the NDC to work, we want to be able to preserve the forest. Liberia has at least 40% of the Upper Guinea forest. So that means we call ourselves the lungs and the heart of Africa. And you put it together with the Congo Basin. What we do, we provide health to the global lungs. How do we preserve that? We want to be able to preserve that. We want to be able to conserve that. But in order to do that, I must be able to offer an alternative to the community that live along the forest. How do I tell them, you can't go into the forest to fell the trees? And this is something from time immemorial. That's why his parents brought him in, their parents brought him in, their grandparents brought him in. How do I do that? We want to be able to help them to do that. To do that, we must provide life skills, alternative life skills, so that they can be able to preserve the forest. Other than that, we call it the chainsaw massacre will continue. As long as you don't do anything about taking care of those people, the chainsaw massacre can continue. In order to stop the chainsaw massacre, then the carbon credit trading comes in. That's where the president of Liberia came from yesterday when he was making reference to the need for a trading facility for Africa, so we can be able to do that. And that is where we are, because the issue of climate change is important. This is, we are in November. This is the dry season. We call it the summer. Normally, we don't have rains. In January, February, that's the peak of the summer. This year, we had torrential rains. We have floods. Never ever seen that. So people understand what climate change is. But when we talk about climate change, then we have to take it from the intellectual level, bring it to the practical level, and what it means. And so what do we do? How have we been able to do it? We started the work from the community. It's the community that informs what we do in the NDC. Then it comes to the government, intersectorial, everybody comes in. And in the EPA, we have something called the ESWG, which is the Environmental Sector Working Group. We meet every month to review the NDC, to review activities of the various sectors and how these sectors individually and collectively impact on the NDC. So this is how we've been going, and I think it's been very refreshing. It's a long haul, but we have to be able to do it. So two things will come. Do we go into mitigation or do we go into adaptation? But mitigation, that's something else. Mitigation is a function of how long it takes to act. When you take a long time to act, you have like to mitigate. Adaptation, we prefer that because there are certain things beyond that that the population or the community we have to do to develop themselves. And maybe later on in the discussion, we can consider globally, you are the partner to see the funding for adaptation. Does it become a loan or a grant? But that's a different argument.
Thank you, Professor, and for being straight to the point and transparent on key questions indeed. And I very much, I'm sharing a number of your messages, notably on the first one on the awareness raising, importance of the awareness raising at all levels is indeed something which I think in all organizations and nations we do face. And of course, the importance of the work that you're doing in your country, especially with regard to forest preservation. I hope that we have the panelists connected. No, is not connected.
No.
We lost connection with the speaker. So I hope. Pardon, je vais retourner au français. En plus, je n'ai pas.
Going to switch back to French now. I'm going to give the floor to Nicolas Géré, so that hoping that he can connect again in time for his intervention, which would have been very interesting to have the supranational level of ECOWAS. I hope he'll come back. So I'll go back to my notes now. Nicolas Genet, we saw how at the level of Ivory Coast and Liberia, those organizations get organized and work on the climate change issues. Now I turn to you as the Director of Sustainable Development of Expertise France. Can you tell us what the role of Expertise France and how your cooperation works, function, seeing all those challenges in those countries? Thank you very much. I hope that we can find ECOWAS back. So I'm going to take the floor before. Thank you very much to my colleagues from the Ivory Coast and Liberia for their interventions, which were very inspiring. The role of an implementation agency like Expertise France is to try and make the strategies and the objectives work from the Paris Agreement, from national and supranational levels, and help the countries and the organizations to operationalize all the varieties of the CDNs as concretely and realistic as possible, and support the countries in their monitoring. Implementation agency like Expertise France operates on mainly European funds and on the working of the European Union, and which deals with, which affects all the countries of ECOWAS and Mauritania. We're trying to work with all of them at several levels. We also work on the French fundings of the French Development Agency on adaptation plans. We're going to strengthen that, contributions of the various countries, and the working. Now, the heart of the core of the implementation of the Paris Agreement is going to be the capacity to express the commitments understood and accepted by the populations and see a certain cohesion between our commitments at the national and international levels. The core of the topic is to be very modestly, and we remain an agency working for the countries and the states and the organizations. It's a possibility, a capacity to transmit, to work in the intersectorial, having people in the various ministries, understanding the CDN and be able to apply it to their sectors, have commitments in the towns which meet the national commitments, and have populations which were made aware to the issues of climate changes, and today able to materialize much better than we do, but need to be supported in their commitments through the funding the states can bring. Expertise France, we're lucky to work with an adaptation programs on tools for the monitoring and assessing tools and implementing the CDNs, and it is already at the core of the discussions of this COP26 to see how we are able to monitor them in Senegal, Niger, and other countries, to be able to work on the follow-up of those countries. And we have also been able, and I hope that we can see our colleague, we have been able to formalize a climate strategy, and I hope he can tell us about that for ECOWAS at least. And also we managed to in Liberia, we contributed with small funds to the organizations of a dialogue for the finalization of this finalized CDN, and it reached its goal at the end of October 2020, and together with the agency of the French Agency of Development, we managed in the secondary towns in Western Africa. We worked on climate plans, and we tried to work on the objectives we have nationally and supranationally in the towns. Our role as implementing agency is to meet this cohesion strategy and see the thread which remains in cohesion and ambitious between the various actors locally, nationally, and internationally even. And once again, and I would like ECOWAS to be able to talk about this program we supported, and I hope that the capacity we'll have through the regional organizations, national and local goals will be important, and we all have to play a role in the implementation of this ambition, which is fully worked out. And so there's a perfect transition, and we have talking about the population nationally, the community, and now we move on to the regional level. Mr. Traoré, we should be online. Can you explain the role of ECOWAS through its mandate to face the climate change? And I think that you have elements to share on your regional strategy, and what can be made by your organization, and it could be interesting.
Merci beaucoup, madame.
Thank you
j'interviens à
very
distance
much.
et c'est pas évident, la connectivité
connection is not always easy when you are far away, but I hope that you can see me and hear me properly. As far as your first question, I would like to say that we as ECOWAS are not an organization, a signatory organization of the Paris Agreement, as is the European Union. And the climate action that we develop is within the constitutions of the region. So our regional action means to complete and support what member states are doing. The second aspect of our action is linked to competences and within our treaty. That is, you need to respect the principle of solidarity to begin with, the principle of cooperation between states, the principle of harmonization of public policies, etc., and of course the principle of subsidiarity, that is, letting the states exert their competences at national level, and we, as ECOWAS, as an organization, try to ensure synergies and consistency. The other element that I'd like to add is that the community right comes before the national law. We try to harmonize things so that climate actions is made more effective, especially because individual states have taken their commitments and commitments which has been explained in the treaty and respect the legal principles of our community. All this is well expressed in our protocol, Article 4, that speaks about the operation of the ECOWAS. So we have a role at regional level, and we act even if we are not part of the COP26 or any other COP. Even if we are not signatories of this treaty, we try to support our countries to pursue this objective. That is why the projects that we are here to present can support the Ivory Coast and all the West African countries so that they can pursue their efforts. The second part of your question, the regional policies are organized through sectorial policies. We have an agricultural policy, an energy policy, policies in the different sectors, and we have realized more and more with the Paris Agreement and other agreements that we at ECOWAS needed to include our view in a kind of framework to guide our regional actions. This will be done through the regional climate strategy, and it is in this framework that we would like to implement this regional mechanism so that we can organize things and be more concrete on the terrain. The first is we have public policies that are made consistent. As an example, we have food security department which has been created and by the 15 states of the community to counter negative effects of climate change. And therefore, by creating these reserves, we can avoid that catastrophic amounts of people, 140 million people who can eventually go hungry due to climate change. So we have more or less anticipated this, and for 4 years we intervene with our states, especially in Sahel countries, whenever there are difficulties. But it was mainly before in the past due to the displacements of people, of populations. However, we use this also for the effects of climate change, floods, and so these mechanisms can be used for these events. The specific case that I wanted to mention has to do with transport. Here again, we have tools to mobilize the regional bodies, and through this master plan we have a number of strategies to ensure interconnectivity, and it is absolutely necessary that for the economic development of the region we have infrastructures, roads that are resilient to the current impact and also future impacts of climate change. One thing is developing an infrastructure plan, and the other is to project it in the future to ensure resilience towards climate change. We have seen floods that would cut roads in two. So we need to anticipate this and foresee this based on our background and history, so that when we are faced with this kind of shock, we can eventually resist. As far as the mitigation of climate change, our climate regional strategy is meant especially to pursue regional objectives which are very ambitious as far as energy efficiency, renewable energy. Since 2015 we have a policy on renewable energies, so that renewable energies are included in the global power mix in the region. So these are large efforts regionally, which are then transposed in the different countries. The second part of our intervention is that our role is supporting member states to make the most of scale economies. And one of the elements is access to the to have access to data concerning climate change. So it would be very difficult for each of our countries to request this access, because climate doesn't know about borders. Our waters, the air is interconnected, so we need to get together on this, and we have regional climate service that has been created, and we are gathering data. As for access to funds, as you know, members of the panel know how difficult it is for all countries to have access to climate funds, adaptation or whatever. We have the impression that together we can be stronger, And this is therefore something that we're working on to reinforce our country's capacities in projects, in the mobilization of resources, and also to build projects as a region. Let me give you a specific example. The ECOWAS area contains many forests that we share in the different areas and different river basins and forests. We have large rivers. So why should one single country like Guinea, for example, take care of it? All countries need to cooperate, and so that we can implement all the protection mechanisms. And this would help us also reinforce financial instruments at regional level, elements that are climate compatible. Well, I don't think we have enough time, but I give you many, many more examples. Just to summarize, the CDL strategy has as an entry point a sectorial approach, energy, transport, agriculture. It will also allow us to position our region in the avant-garde. We can show the world that we can contribute to the we play a role to avoid regional dangers. I think that the minister said it before. The issue of adaptation is much more the core of an action than that of mitigation. But we do these two approaches together. And finally, we will have many institutions, many mechanisms, and tools for implementation to accompany all these efforts. I mentioned the Agrimet Center, that will be a climate service for the ECOWAS Center, but then we have also the Bank of the ECOWAS that we are approaching for climate purposes so that funds can be released for our member states. Thank you very much. I hope you have heard me properly and that my presentation was clear enough. Thank you very much, Mr. Traoré. It was very clear, very specific. It was great to hear very specific examples that have to do with the explicit role of the EcoWatch. You have mentioned the importance of data. It is for us all a challenge to have the proper climate data to work on models and orient decisions in a world which will become more and more uncertain. So we need to also you have mentioned the possibility of having access to green funds. So let's now go on to the last part of this panel. Let me give you the floor for questions in our chat. You have the address slido.com where you can ask your questions. We have a number of questions already. The first has to do with the intervention by Professor Darquet on civil society and is also for the presenter from the Ivory Coast, so Mr. Traoré, if he's still online. So how do you work on these issues? Let me begin with you, Mr. Zapka. I think that we have two questions. The commitment of the stakeholders, be them private or civil society. As I said in my presentation, all this is done with different projects that have implemented. We need tools to make this coordination operational. However, the effort made in the review is based on these different coordinations. You know that the private sector is organized around umbrella organizations. Organizations of civil society also have umbrella bodies, and we have used these mechanisms to create these different platforms, which are platforms that allow us to coordinate and follow up on these climate actions. But beyond that, in these bodies, you also have people that are focal points. In the private sector and also in civil society, we have these kind of links with whom we work to collect information, collect data, and also to validate specific tools. For example, so we contact these focal points, to work with them and obtain and achieve results. And going back to the question that is about our challenges, it is quite true that we have many mechanisms. However, we need an operational framework. That's what we did for the review. To review our NDCs, we use consultants. For example, consultants were there to collect information in a given sector. So they did their analysis, and then the other sectors became interested and wondered, what methodology did you use? How did you collect this data? So we need lots of discussion with the different sectors to collect data before being able to do any kind of compilation. So this has taken a great effort to do the review of indices, and we're waiting with great impatience the project by the European Union, which we reinforce our sectoral capacity so that different sectors can collect the data and also introduce operational mechanisms. So what we would see is that we would have key people in the different ministries, and we would reinforce their capacity. They would collect information and also share information with the coordinating bodies. In that way, we won't have to wait for the reviews to wait for the results. This is something that will be done on a daily basis, and so that decision makers can make decisions, and that will help themselves to know what direction they're moving towards. So this is a great challenge of coordination. We have been able to meet efficiently because one of the problems that we had was that we did not have a follow-up system. We conduct many actions, but if you said that something was done in 2018, well, we don't know anymore. So today we need to take time and to create a follow-up body that will help us ourselves and our governments so that they can take efficient decisions. Thank you very much. The review and the follow-up of the review and training and better skills and competences is essential. Mr. Trowley, are you still online? This question about the role of civil society is also for you. And I see they're still online. Yes, I'm always here. I'm still here. Thank you for your question. Our brother from the Ivory Coast, the problem that he has at national level is even larger at regional level, and civil society is a stakeholder in the different mechanisms, and sometimes their opinion, public opinion, say that things are too slow because we want processes that are very inclusive and based on participation. to ensure the success of public policy. We have working groups and support groups where we gather different actors, NGOs, representatives of the civil state, different sectors to participate in the brainstorming. And besides that, we conduct a very dynamic work with groups of what we call initiators, West African initiators who go and advocate our positions at the highest level. And we have a panoply of sectoral organizations, the West African Federation of Chambers of Commerce and Industry, different sectors of corn, fisheries, etc. We have many, many bodies, and we work with all of these organizations to do as much as we can. But at the same time, we cannot spend too much time in dialogue. We need to also propose actions, put them on the table, and start doing something. The other institutions are a bit more formal, that the BOAD serve as mechanisms to finance adaptation. However, we also have the BDC, which is becoming stronger, and other regional institutions like Pascal, which is an institution that does academic training for PhD students or students taking a master's degree. We have even a master's degree specialized in climate and adaptation, climate change adaptation, so that this helps us involve academia, students, practitioners, public servants, and all kinds of professionals. And I think that we have three areas: the institutional capacity, the coordination capacity. What I've explained is rather complicated. It's very difficult to coordinate and to share a common view with multi-sectoral stakeholders. However, it is not impossible, and this is our job anyway, so that's what we're working for. And the biggest challenge, I think, is the capacity of implementing mechanisms that will help us respond to the requests of the states. If a state requests, for example, support to conduct sectoral studies or analysis, that will help them take an operational decision in public finances, or to calculate taxes or interventions in climate change actions. We should be able to bring this information rapidly. So this is our biggest challenge today. We don't have the necessary means. We have so many different challenges in the region, because when you speak about climate to somebody who's hungry or somebody who has all kinds of problems, they will tell you that you are just too far off. So we need to give them very specific examples and concrete examples for them to understand that this is something that has an impact on their daily life.
To Professor Tarpe, there was a question regarding how does an institution like your agency engage stakeholders like the private sector or the youth to ensure the implementation of your NDC in Liberia?
Okay, first we'll start with what the NDC is. The NDC, as you know more than I do, is the country's definition of what it intends to
NDC. NDC.
That would be waste, the way we manage the waste, the way we treat fossil fuels, those things, renewable energy, and all of that. I earlier told you that the country, 60% of the country is below the age of 35. So we start our work from that level, from the community. We work as an active intersectoral unit. We go to the schools, we go to the communities, and we get them involved. As a matter of fact, something else is starting, thanks to these guys sitting over here. We get the community involved, and they go into what we call CBEs, community-based enterprises, because the polluter pay principle is applied at that level. If you pollute a place, you create dirt, you must pay some money for it. So these young people are organized. There are student groups, the environmental groups are all in all of the schools. So they are informed about that. Our people go there regularly. In the community, they turn the waste into money. They form their companies in the community, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 persons. To the extent that we can help them, we create a corporate umbrella for them to do it legally. And that some of them are beginning to now turn waste into usable products. Uh, those of you who got mathematics background, they are geometry sets. Now there are kids now who are turning plastic waste into geometry sets. They are turning plastic waste into fuel. Again, that should be for a short time because fuel again is another situation. So that is where our strength lies. Because if we can get the message through that level, that 60% of the population, then a lot has to be done. Then we come to the industry. The industry, now you have to understand the configuration of the industry and what drives the industry. That's where the political organization comes in. Because if I'm telling a guy, say, I will not call the name of the company that is involved in gold, the production of gold. These guys, they use some like 1.4 million gallons a quarter. And that fossil fuel, that's a lot. How do we get them to move towards renewable energy? And I will come to my brother here. That's where the sub-regional group begins to work together. Ivory Coast, we have the West African Power Pool, we have the CLSG, which is now using renewable energy using the hydro. Now, in the next quarter, we expect those companies using fossil fuel to only use it as a backup because that is going to be very, very important. And so when we get a community involved, that's what we do to get the young people involved, get the community involved, and then our contribution with the NDC, we think it has a chance. Why? Because we are talking about tomorrow, and this is the country, this is the population we are talking about. So we work with them, and by working with them, the power goes up there to the political part. Fortunately, at the head of at the top of the political level are people who come from down there, and they understand that. That's where we are. Is it going to be an easy thing? No, no. There's not going to be a walk in the park. But I can assure you we are on a path to make sure we can pursue that. And you know there are two elements of it. Some of them are conditional, some are unconditional. The unconditional is about a third. So we look up to the international community for the remaining two-thirds to be able to effectively follow that. People are saying, oh, it's not ambitious enough. But our attitude in the EPA in Liberia is that as much as you want to be ambitious, you have to be realistic. Because at the end of the day, if you get so overly ambitious and you are not able to deliver a reasonable part of that, then you create, there becomes a trust issue. And we don't want that. If we stay at 490.5 million where we are, we do better and we do more than that, then I think we prefer to do that. And that's what the situation is. So our work with the young people is just at that level because they are involved and they will help us to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's nice to end this session with this word about involving the youth. We know, of course, how important it is. There was a last question for Nicolas, but I think we have no time left. I would like to thank, pardon, et je peux repasser en français. Je voudrais vous remercier, mais c'est
Excuse me, I'll speak again in French, out of politeness also. So thank you all for this session that I personally found very interesting, and it shows that the sensitization towards climate change, awareness raising about climate change needs to involve the population and the young, and we know that this is with effort for the different bodies and organizations that are in charge of that. We have also created a link between the local level, regional level, national level, and supranational level. So all these interventions have been very interesting. So thank you all very much for your participation and for your participation at this very late hour.
Bye bye.